Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om. Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Reverend Gordon Preece. He's an Anglican minister. And Gordon is also the director of the Ethos Centre for Christianity and Society. Thanks for coming in again, Gordon. We did speak to you some 18 months ago. Can you just give us a bit of a background on ethos? What's that set up to do?
Well, ethos is a term that means character, and often in ethical debates in our society, I think you get caught between, let's say, the Abrahamic religions with commands and rules, and a secular society that often focuses mainly on consequences.
Yes. And
I think the missing middle is the middle of character, or virtues, the Greek term, or the original Greek sort of term for it, and that's really about how you find yourself in the light of a story. Like an actor has to have a script, they have a story, they live that out, and I think it's partly that Western societies, I think, have lost their sense of their original kind of religious story that's led to a lot of the kind of ethical problems that we have today. So we try and encourage various institutions, the church, the nation, it could be a corporation, we do business ethics, etc. We try and encourage them to think about the character issues, and for individuals as well. So it operates at both levels, the individual and the institution, and that's what we try and get at.
And how does it come out? You have a publication? And
Yeah, we have two quarterlies, Zadok Perspectives, which won the 2013 Australian Religious Press Award as best
good.
Australasian best Australasian religious publication, and Equip. Zadok Perspectives kind of focuses more on sort of, if you like, Christians in their public roles, and the scattered people of God at work in various kinds of places. It could be in government, education, it could be social work or health. And so we try and help people live out the faith, Monday Christianity, not just Sunday Christianity. And Equip magazine focuses more on kind of local church mission, and we call it the hopes and fears of all the years.
Right.
It could be children's issues, it could be youth, ageing, a range of issues like that.
And so did that sometimes lead into conferences or presentations? Or?
Yeah. We like we have for our AGM we have Robert Banks, possibly Australia's most creative theologian, who will be speaking on the time of our lives, work-life imbalance, and the dangers of that. And Robert's done a lot of thinking and work on that, and has put it into practice very well. And so he'll be speaking on that for us on the 23rd of October. And later on we'll have on the 21st of November, we'll have a civil conversation on homosexuality and gay marriage and issues like that, trying to get both sides and different perspectives on that debate together in a civil kind of way, rather than people just calling each other names or lobbing grenades out of the trenches. That's what we're trying to do with that one as well. We often try and get people of different perspectives together.
Yes.
A bit like the title of your program in a way, kind of diversity and harmony, how to work that out in a sort of secular pluralist kind of society where there's a range of religions and none. How can we talk about these issues and issues of character and what kind of country we want to be? And
and that's a big issue. So with your magazines, what's the readership, the breadth of that? Is it sort of statewide, or is it
They're nationwide.
nationwide?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, they're nationwide. We really came out of a merger of two national groups, and the Ethos Centre for Christianity and Society, which celebrates its 40th anniversary next year,
Okay.
and the Evangelical Alliance Public Theology Centre. So we drew those two together to kind of double the resources. And also they each have their own kind of constituency. So Zadok tended to be a bit more centre-left, if you like, both theologically and politically. And EA, the Evangelical Alliance, is probably a little bit more conservative and a bit more sort of centre-right, both theologically and politically.
Right.
And we have a monthly Engage email that goes out for free, that people can just go to our website, www.ethos.org.au. Are we allowed to advertise? And people can get that for free, and we have 4 articles on topical issues, and we try and get those two constituencies to talk to each other, to dialogue with each other.
Right, right.
And we figure if we help each other do that in the church, then that helps train us to be able to do that in a pluralist kind of society.
Absolutely.
That has a range of different views out there, and to do that in a civil kind of way.
Yeah, well that leads to one of the principal issues that perhaps we should be discussing is the issue of giving God a bad name. And I know you've got some views on this, and if we can just roll out some of the ways in which you think God gets this bad name and the ways in which we might be able to combat it.
Right. Well, I think this came out of a series I was doing on the Ten Commandments, or the Big Ten, as I like to call them, and their role in, if you like, Judeo-Christian societies. And I think often people have kind of focused on just not saying the word God, or that could be blasphemous if you used it. Like the Jews actually, they would only use the syllables without the vowels.
Yes.
So YHWH. Now, some people have filled it in and say Yahweh. Others sort of extend it and say Jehovah. But I think the main point behind it is not to criticise people who happen to take the name God on their lips, particularly non-Christians who don't know what they're doing. So they're doing that ignorantly.
Talking about not knowing what they're doing, I shouldn't have asked you a long question before the break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Reverend Gordon Preece. He's an Anglican minister. He is also the director of the Ethos Centre for Christianity and Society. And before the break, we were just raising the question about how God gets a bad name. And you were about to illuminate that, Gordon.
Well, I think sometimes Christians and others have been a bit obsessive just about the name in itself, or taking it on our lips, or blaming, say, non-Christians or non-believers for using the name of God, sometimes in ignorance, or sometimes maybe a swear word, or the sort of OMG kind of thing. I actually have a friend who set up his church, and it's called an OMG church. So they decided to turn it around and make it, so they have this big tower with OMG up there. But I think what the Bible's getting at in the third commandment is saying, don't trivialise God. Don't make God's name vain or empty. Don't use it as something to kind of cover over your own ideology, whether it's political or religious or whatever, and use God as a means to an end.
Yes.
And Jesus has some very strong things to say about people doing that. And he says, don't swear by Jerusalem. This is in the Sermon on the Mount. Don't swear by Jerusalem. Don't swear by your own head. Don't make vows by anything. Just let your yes be yes and your no, no. Just be truthful.
That's right.
Of truthful character, getting back to what we're saying about ethos. About having a truthful character. Not just a bunch of rules. Rules are necessary, but the inner reality behind that is a truthful character. And so I think that's what Jesus is really after. I can remember having a discussion with a friend once who was deeply offended about the film Kenny that was shown at his church. And he kept saying it was blasphemous. And I started thinking, am I insensitive or what? But I just remember just laughing and laughing and laughing. And, I can remember plenty of poo jokes, et cetera, because Kenny's basically he has portaloos and that, right. And he really picks up the crap, if you like, out from people's lives. But I actually thought it had a profoundly Christian message of a real servant, the people who really picked up the crap, which is that, and I think Christ takes the crap of the world on himself on the cross. And so, but he kept going on about it till finally, after hearing this umpteen times, I just said, the real blasphemy isn't someone just, mentioning God's name like in a film like Kenny. It's when a believer like George W. Bush, for instance, actually uses God's name to justify bombing the hell out of the Iraqis. And we're still picking up the pieces of that and the damage that is done in Iraq with ISIS now and what's going on in Syria. And to actually say that God told him to go and basically get rid of Saddam, and God called him to do that. I don't deny his sincerity, but I think he was sincerely wrong.
Yes.
And it's done enormous damage to God's name and God's character. And even now at the moment, there are protests. I think at a mosque. I think it was in Sydney, against the Crusaders. Both America and the coalition of which we're part, and the Russians.
Yes. Because
they're both seen as Western Christianity and Eastern Christianity.
Yes.
And Muslims are saying, you're kind of using God's name and in a sense kind of blaspheming by bombing the hell out of this place. It's done enormous damage.
It does, and I know in something of yours I read, you quoted that song by Bob Dylan about God being on our side. It's very telling, because particularly at the moment with our confrontation with Islam in many places, which God is it? Is it one God or is it many gods? It's pretty frightening. Yeah,
and we've got to be very careful that in using God's name to go to war, and that's been done many times I think it goes right back to the time of Constantine, when who took over as he was the first Christian, I say, sort of in inverted commas, because there's lots of debate about that, to what extent he was using God to try and unite the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But there was this slogan about God on our side, or God with us.
Yes.
And that goes right through to the German belt buckles in the First World War had Gott mit uns, which is God with us, on them.
Yes.
And so Dylan's getting at that. He looks at it particularly in American history, etc. But he really mocks that misuse of God. Dylan, both as a Jew and later as a Christian, I think really sees through that and thinks that is the real blasphemy.
Yeah, and of course there's also a bit of contention that arises between the Old Testament and the New Testament in the Christian context, doesn't it? Because it comes from a smiting God to a loving God, and that attachment to God will smite on my behalf tends to set God up, and you see that sometime in Israel's behaviour.
Yeah, I think where the shift really comes is kind of between a holy war and a holy land.
Yes.
And sort of defending that holy land. And in the New Testament, that's moved on, where, if you like, there is no holy place, and Jesus replaces the temple, and God's people are from all races, Jews and Gentiles, and so you can't claim God's holy name or land or temple
No.
in that kind of way.
No.
And in fact, that's really quite blasphemous to do that. God's revealed himself most fully and utterly and completely in Jesus.
In Jesus, yes, yes. Yes, combating that or reintroducing God in the appropriate context. And we're going to run out of time on this question, so I'll hang it into the next sector, but is to say, how do we make God's name more comfortable, more applicable, more available justly? So we'll be back to that. All right.
Good.
We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity. And today we're speaking with Reverend Gordon Preece. He's an Anglican minister and he's the director of Ethos, the Centre of Christianity and Society. And we were talking about using God's name in a way, an appropriate way. How would you go about ensuring you did that?
Well, I think Jesus gives us a good model, because Peter is asked, well, the disciples are asked, but Peter's the usual spokesperson. He usually puts his foot in it. I like Peter that way. And at the end of Mark chapter 8, Jesus says, well, who do people say that I am? And Peter pipes up. He calls Jesus the Messiah after, some say Jesus is a prophet, some say this, etc., etc. And Messiah means king, and he gets that right. But then Jesus says, well, the Son of Man, which is the way Jesus tended to refer to himself, it's a fairly mysterious kind of term, but fairly transcendent, someone who's sort of with God and who will ultimately judge the world. He says the Son of Man is going to be given over and betrayed and crucified, and after 3 days rise from the dead. Well, Peter's horrified at this, says, no, that can't happen, Then Jesus tells him, well, get behind me, Satan. This is from the devil, what you're saying. So he's saying that the closest we can get to the very character and name of God is in the crucifixion. That is the very definition of love, where God actually enters into our world and carries our sin on his shoulders on the cross in Christ. And Paul picks up that idea later when he says that he talks about Jesus having in Philippians chapter 2 that he has not tried to grasp divinity or God's name like Adam and Eve did, tried to become God in that way, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant or a slave, and then he's crucified, which is a slave's death. And then he says, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And so he's completely redefining what kingship is. He's redefining what lordship or being an emperor is. Like this is in a Roman colony of Philippi.
Yes.
He's saying, when we live like that as servants, Jesus told us to live as servants, not trying to use God's name to triumph or dominate over people, etc., or to make excuses for going to war. When we live peacefully, when we seek reconciliation, then we're actually spelling out God's name, God's character, because name is closely related to character. Then we're doing it properly.
Thanks for that. That's a very illuminating way to look at it, and it also reflects over to the widely held view that God is love, if you like. So that if you're going to be that love, you will be just as you described, a servant.
It's costly, sacrificial service, giving ourselves away, like God gave himself away on the cross.
Thank you. You've written quite a few articles, etc., and I, in going through one of them in particular, one that sort of struck me is the one about adultery that you wrote, which dealt particularly with the tissue of lies in one part of it. That tissue of lies, when it's entered into, say from adultery and from other activities, tends to debase the whole of the society. Put us across that tissues of lies.
Well, the actual title of it was called Adultery Isn't Very Adult, or Isn't Adult. And so in a way I think it's a slight misnomer. I think it's childish, and I think it's people often covering up their basic lack of faithfulness.
Yes.
And I think that's not just about the sex, even though the sex is very significant, but it's the lies, the tales that people come up with, the debasement of trust and character.
That's right.
Someone thinks they know someone, but now they find out they've got a double life.
Yes.
And people get, well, oh, what tangled webs we weave when first we practice to deceive,
Yeah.
as Shakespeare said.
Yes.
And the examples of adultery that I've seen in my own family of origin, destroyed my parents' marriage. In other situations, people I really looked up to, what you see is the tissue of lies.
That's right.
And which destroys trust. And well, what else is there about you that I don't know?
That's right. Yes.
And what about all those people in terms of Ashley Madison in this Canadian kind of website, and the millions, and now that's been the damage wasn't just when it was known.
No.
The damage was already going on.
Yes.
Before that was exposed.
That's right.
It kind of came to a head when it was actually exposed. But this was doing damage to those people's relationships.
Yes.
It was cutting away at the character of their lives and their lives together, tearing them apart.
And just compromising honour at the base level. So that I think in your article you mentioned about how important it is not to tell that first lie. Because the first lie is the one, it's the death by 1,000 cuts after that.
Yeah. I think that's important, because our character is formed by habit, and it's building up of act upon act, and they're like layers of sediment that form the self, like you see layers of sandstone or something like
That's
that.
right. Yeah.
Well, they start to become hardened. Those habits become hardened over time and form our character.
I'm glad you mentioned time, Gordon, because we're out of time for this session, and clearly there's many, many more things we need to speak about. So would you come back next week and do that?
Certainly.
That'd be fantastic. Thanks, Gordon. You've been watching Harmony and Diversity, and we'll be back next week, and we'll be speaking with Gordon Preece. Bye for now.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om.